Reprise de débat. The honourable
resuming debate
to the Minister of Justice and Attorney General.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I rise today to speak on our government's motion about climate change brought forward by the Honourable Minister of the Environment and Climate Change. I'll be splitting my time with the Honourable Member from Lac St. Louis. I applaud the Minister for bringing forward this motion. As I and my constituents know, climate change and its effect on the environment is the most pressing issue facing our planet. It is something that the courts of this country, as recently as the Saskatchewan Court of Appeal about 3 weeks ago, have called a, quote, existential threat, Madam Speaker. This motion will declare rightfully that Canada is in a national climate emergency, and it should be supported in a nonpartisan manner by every member of this chamber. Madam Speaker, we know that climate change is real and that it is a product of human activity. We understand the urgency of the situation, an urgency that was underscored by the IPCC report released in October of 2018 that prompted an emergency debate right here in this chamber. We know from that report that we have 11 years to limit a climate change catastrophe. And a recent report from officials within the Government of Canada at Environment and Climate Change Canada tells us that Canada is actually warming twice as fast as the rest of the world. And that's a point that I'll return to later, Madam Speaker. Therefore, urgent change is needed to limit the risk of extreme weather events, some of which we've already begun to see happening here at home and around the world, and the repercussions that would follow therefrom. These repercussions are many, Madam Speaker. They could range from extreme poverty to an impact on the physical health of Canadians, to even the movement of further peoples in terms of fueling a migrant crisis, Madam Speaker. That is what the motion in the House before you today is about. It's about addressing these situations, and this needs to be done as a matter of urgency. The motion also acknowledges the fact that climate change especially impacts coastal, northern, and Indigenous communities. These groups are often the first, Madam Speaker, to experience the effects of climate change because of their heavy reliance on the lands they live on in order to sustain themselves. Whether it is the alteration of animal migration routes, the dwindling numbers of certain species of animals in provinces like BC, Alberta, and the Territories, such as moose or caribou, or the degradation of habitat in coastal communities leading to marine ecosystems disappearing. These communities on the front line of climate change feel the brunt of its devastating effects. That is why, Madam Speaker, since 2015, what we've done as a government is consistently invested in measures that will shore up protections against climate change. $500 million invested into the Nature Fund with provinces, territories, and not-for-profits, corporate and other partners, which allows us to secure private lands, support environmental species protection efforts, and help build Indigenous capacity to conserve land and species. $1.5 billion on an ocean protections plan, the largest of its kind in the world, Madam Speaker, which is helping to restore marine ecosystems and create innovative cleanup methods, and a $1.4 billion investment in the low carbon economy leadership fund that will support clean growth and reduce greenhouse gases. That's money that we are putting on the table and cooperating with provinces that want to cooperate. But what we've actually done with that funding, Madam Speaker, is made it available to municipalities, universities, schools, hospitals, and organizations, even where provincial governments don't want to cooperate with the Low Carbon Economy Leadership Fund initiative. And I'm speaking specifically in terms of the province that I represent in this chamber and the government of Doug Ford, who's clearly stepped out of the battle against climate change. But I'll be addressing that further later on in my comments. We're also investing $1.3 billion in land conservation. We did that in the budget last year, Madam Speaker. That's the largest such investment in Canadian history, and it will more than double the amount of protected areas in this country. Madam Speaker, there's been $20 million to support a pan-Canadian framework on clean growth and climate change. There's also Bill C-69, a bill that is geared at addressing the environmental assessment system and ensuring that consultation with Indigenous communities is at the forefront, as well as protecting our marine species and our waterways when we're considering energy projects. Madam Speaker, members on this side of the aisle are under no illusions. Let me be crystal clear on this. We know that despite these initiatives which I've mentioned, despite the real progress we have made, there's still much more to be done, very much more to be done to ensure a cleaner future for our children and our grandchildren. And the motion indeed recognizes this. The motion talks about working harder to meet the emission targets under the Paris Climate Agreement, but also about making even deeper reductions in line with the effort to keep global warming below actually 1.5 degrees Celsius. That is what I've heard in my riding, that is what I've heard in Toronto, in Ontario, and indeed throughout the country in the context of travel that I've undertaken for my parliamentary duties. I've heard that from in my riding entities such as Green 13 or Green a City. I've heard that in terms of significant stakeholders like Environmental Defence and the leadership of Keith Brooks. I've heard that from people like Catherine Abreu at Climate Action Network. What they're saying is the writing is on the wall, what we need is more ambition. This motion addresses the need for more ambition. But the single most important step is the economic step that was raised in the previous contributions to this debate about putting a price on pollution. So let me say a few things about the price on pollution. First, this was something that was actually initiated by Stéphane Dion when he was the leader of the Liberal Party back in 2008. Then it was vilified as a green shift and completely abhorrent policy by then leader Stephen Harper. That was inaccurate then and it remains inaccurate now, but unfortunately the vilification continues with inaccuracies, untruths, and outright falsehoods that are being propagated about this policy. And let's list them, Madam Speaker, because they are numerous. What we're working on is a policy that came into place in January against businesses. So yes, the plan does include businesses. Falsehood number one, which is being perpetrated by the side opposite. Secondly, it is a very basic concept. Pollution should not be free. When it is free, you have more of it. When it is not free, you have less of it. The logic is that simple. Basically, elementary kids understand it. They're the kids that are leaving schools on Fridays for the Futures because they're trying to convince people who are adults, some of whom are in this chamber, about that very simple logic. Another important aspect is that it is somehow being labeled as a tax. So I'm trying not to be a constitutional lawyer about this, Madam Speaker, but you'll allow me one point here. A tax is something that you collect that goes to general revenue. It is money collected through something like a GST that you can spend on streetcars in Toronto or bridges in Halifax. It is spent as the government of the day sees fit. A regulatory charge is revenue neutral. You collect money, you attribute it, and spend all of it to one particular program. That is exactly what this is, and guess what? The Saskatchewan Court of Appeal found exactly that. This is a revenue-neutral regulatory charge. I'm actually stupefied by the inability of the members opposite to grasp this because they voted on this issue and it's entrenched in the bill. They didn't support it, but hopefully they would have read it. Third point, Madam Speaker, I think I'm on my third, I might be on my fourth, is that, in fact, no one's getting anything back. That's just false on its face. There's something called a climate action rebate incentive that is being returned to you. It is $307 for a family of four in Ontario. It is larger in places that are more rural. In fact, there's even a rural top-up. Money is coming back into people's pockets. It is not being taken from them. 80% of people in this country will be better off because of this process, and it is a process that has been shown to work. Where has it been shown to work? In places like British Columbia that have had this process in place for the longest amount of time. And this is one that I absolutely adore, Madam Speaker. We don't have the jurisdiction to act. Again, let's take it back to that grade 3 elementary logic. Air pollution, water pollution, these traverse provincial borders. Ergo, the national government has jurisdiction to act. That's exactly what we're doing. That's exactly what the Saskatchewan Court of Appeal validated. And what I find most troubling is that underpinning all of this is some sort of skewed logic. When you go to the climate change conference, which I did in Poland last year, you see the United Nations literally begging the nation states of the world to take action on what is not just a national problem, it is an international problem, Madam Speaker. And what you have, nevertheless, is people like Jason Kenney, Scott Moe, Brian Pallister, and Doug Ford saying, no, 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 tut, 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 Government of Canada, you don't actually have the jurisdiction to act. That's false on its face. It's been shown to be false in law. It is also fallacious logic, and it is unbecoming of people in this chamber to perpetuate it. What I would say to you, Madam Speaker, is that all of this information is readily available to discerning people. We try not to patronize or play down to, we try to elevate the level of debate both for the people in this chamber, but also for Canadians who can grasp these issues. And some of those Canadians are some of the stakeholders that exist in my riding. And what I want to outline is some of the important advocacy that they've done. Cycle TO advocating for active transport. That is what we've delivered with more bike share stations. People like Ronci Reduces in my riding talking about, you know what, we can already start to address the need for plastics by curbing the demand for plastics, by encouraging people to take things like Tupperware into stores in Roncesvalles Village so that they're not using styrofoam containers. That's leadership, and it starts at the grassroots level. It is organizations like Ronci Reduces, it's organizations like Cycle TO, it's organizations like Green 13 and Green Green Parkdale and Venus City that are pushing this forward. They're educating me, they're educating other parliamentarians, they're educating all of us of all ages to get tough with this issue. It is an existential threat. That is why we need to call it an emergency, because that's what it is. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Questions and comments? The honourable member for Sherwood Park, Fort Saskatchewan.